Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Commander 2017 spoilers. So we've had cats, we've had vampires, we've had dragons, and we've finally reached Wizard Day, the deck I was probably most excited about. And I have to say, while we haven't seen all the wizards yet, I am not disappointed. There are a ton of sweet wizards to talk about, along with some more vampires and stuff from other decks as well. So a quick reminder before we get to our wizards, like yesterday and the day before, important to remember that all of these cards, all the Commander 2017 cards, not legal in Standard, not legal in Modern, so our focus today will mostly be on Commander and maybe older formats if there's anything relevant to Vintage or Legacy. Anyway, let's jump right into it with the face card of the Wizard deck, Inalla Archmage Ritualist, and this card is my pick for one of the most powerful Eminence, or do this for free from your Command Zone cards ever printed. It is so good. So the body, it's a 4/5 for 5 in the Grixis colors, whatever. If it's on the battlefield, you can tap 5 wizards and make a player lose 7 life, which is pretty nice. But the big deal here is whenever a non-token Winters enters the battlefield, if Inalla is in your command zone, you get to pay 1 and you get a token that's a copy of it. It gains haste, it gets exiled at the beginning of the next end step. So that ability is potentially super bonkers. So it's kind of like half of Riku of 2 reflections, except you don't even have to cast it and have it on the battlefield. It just sits in your command zone and you get to make copies of it. Of course, the copy doesn't stick around, so I guess that's a bit of a downside, but really, I think the best way to think of Inalla is like one of my favorite cards in all of Commander. It's kind of a wizard Panharmonicon. So the thing with Inalla and wizards is a lot of the sweet wizards are legendary. There's some good ones that aren't legendary, and if you copy a legendary wizard with Inalla, it's going to kill the token immediately, because you're going to want to keep the real one around. But that means you get to double up all the enter the battlefield triggers of your wizards for just 1 mana. So it's basically Wizard Panharmonicon that you have all the time for free from your command zone. So what are we doubling up with Inalla? We got Master of Waves, for example. You make a whole bunch more elemental tokens. Pretty sweet. Doubles up the number. Disciple of Bolas lets you sacrifice even more creatures and gain even more life and draw even more cards. Double up your flashy dual caster mage to double copy a spell. And even with legends like Venser Shaper Savant and like Vendilion Click, it's still fine. Like, yes, you don't get to keep the token around and attack with it, but it's going to go away at the end of turn anyway, so just paying 1 mana to bounce 2 permanents with Venser, to Vendilion Click 2 different opponents and look at their hand is super amazing. So I think Inalla is insane. It is automatically my commander next time I build a wizard deck. No question about it. It's a Panharmonicon that sits in the command zone. It's just so sweet. It is such a me card. It is exactly what I want in cards. When we were coming into Commander 2017, I mentioned that the way I grade Commander cards is, do they work with Panharmonicon, do they draw me cards, or do they keep me alive long enough to draw cards and cast Panharmonicon? And I didn't expect that we would get a wizard Panharmonicon that works from the command zone. So that just blows me away. That's like off the charts in my ranking scale. It is a Panharmonicon. So I'm super excited for Inalla. I think it's going to be really good and a ton of fun to play with. Our next legendary wizard is Mairsil the Pretender, which is another super tricky, super sweet card. So 4 mana, you get a 4/4 in the Grixis colors, of course. When it enters a battlefield, you get to exile an artifact or a creature from your hand or graveyard, and you put a cage counter on it, and then Mairsil has all of the activated abilities of all the exiled cards with counters on them. Oh yeah, by the way, you can only activate each ability once each turn, which is actually important, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So the sweet thing about this is it powers up from your command zone every time you cast it. The first time you exile one thing, the next time you cast it from your command zone, you exile something else, it'll have 2 activated abilities. The next time it'll have 3 activated abilities, so it gets progressively more and more powerful as the game goes along, so it doesn't reset. So eventually, when you're casting Mairsil for like 10, 12 mana, it's going to have a ton of activated abilities, and you can use each one of them every turn, 1 time. So the key thing here is, while Mairsil reminds me of Necrotic Ooze, it's really important to point out that you can't combo with it. Necrotic Ooze mostly combos with like Phyrexian Devourer to put a ton of counters on it, and then Triskelion to shoot opponents down. You can't really do that with Mairsil because because you can only activate each ability once, so it's going to be a really slow pinging process with Triskelion. However, there's some really sweet abilities just in the wizard tribe that you can copy, like Arcanus Omnipotent to draw 3 cards. That's pretty good. A Memnarch for only 4 mana to steal all your opponent's stuff seems pretty good. Disciple of the Rings has a ton of different abilities on it, and that's not even to mention the artifact part. Brea Ethereum Sculptor is a ton of activated abilities, can do everything. One of the most popular commanders to date. Bosch Iron Golem can kill the opponent really quickly by sacking artifacts. You can even make Mairsil into a Goblin Charbelcher in creature form that can just shoot down your opponents once each turn. So I think that there's a ton of possibilities here, and I'm really excited for the brew around potential of this commander. While it's a wizard, it definitely doesn't need to be played in a wizard deck. I expect we'll find this more in strange value, weird activated ability type decks, and I think it's going to be really fun to play with in those decks. We also got in the wizard deck Vindictive Lich, which is a really unique way to kill your opponent. It's a 4/1 for 4 mana, which, I mean, not a great body, but that's okay because you actually want Vindictive Lich to die, because when it dies, you get to choose 3 different modes. So you can make an opponent sacrifice a creature, you can make an opponent discard 2 cards, make an opponent lose 5 life. It's almost like a demonic pact on a body when it dies. So what I really want to do is just use like Oversold Cemeteries, Phyrexian Reclamations, Tortured Existences to just keep getting it back and getting it back. 4 mana isn't that much. There's tons of sack outlets in black, so you use it, drain your opponents, kind of tear apart their hand, do all that stuff, and then you just get it back and do it again and do it again and do it again. It can actually be a legitimate win condition if you can just keep getting it back from your graveyard over and over again. So a really sweet addition to like aristocrat stealth sacrifice reanimation style decks. We also got Karu Mind Eater, which is pretty much a hybrid of Nightville Spectre and Hypnotic Spectre. 3 mana. You get to attack with it with Menace, which doesn't quite give it flying, but it still gives it a bit of an evasion. When it deals combat damage to a player, they get to exile a card from their hand face down, and you can look at and play the cards that are exiled with Karu Mind Eater. So it's kind of Nightville Spectre's ability, except you're taking it from your opponent's hand, which makes it a little bit like Hypnotic Spectre because your opponents are losing cards. So a really cool vampire that works in a really unique way. So I think it's a really sweet addition. I like these 3 mana value generating creatures. Probably most likely to show up in like a Send Triplets style deck, which is the kind of steal your opponent's stuff archetype. The only thing to mention is, unlike some of the cards that have similar abilities, it does not say you can use mana of any color to cast the card. So if you're playing Karu Mind Eater, keep that in mind. You have to actually pay the mana cost of that card, including the right colors of mana. So make sure you have your chromatic lanterns and stuff like that available so you can actually pay for your opponent's red cards and green cards, even if you're a mono black deck. Next up, we have Patron of the Vein, which is the new Dark Hatchling, basically. It's almost exactly Dark Hatchling, with upside. 4/4 flyer for 6, you get to destroy a creature when it enters the battlefield, and then whenever a creature an opponent's control dies, you exile it, which is nice because so many commander decks use their graveyard, so you get rid of it forever, and you get to Anthem your vampire team with +1/+1 counters. So we've seen a lot of similar creatures. I mentioned Dark Hatchling, kind of like Noxious Gearhulk, kind of like Overseer the Damned, but Patron of the Vein has a couple of big upsides. The Exile Clause, as we mentioned, and if you're a vampire deck, it's actually very powerful to put a bunch of counters on things. So I think this will be a natural inclusion in any vampire deck, but I don't think you even have to be vampires to play this card. You can just play it in the Noxious Gearhulk Dark Hatchling slot, and it might even be better than any of those cards thanks to the Exile Clause. We also got a Galecaster Colossus, which is another one of our Wizards cards, and it's basically the world's slowest Cyclonic Rift. You can tap a wizard to bounce a non-land permanent that you don't control. So if you have a bunch of wizards, you can literally build your own Cyclonic Rift with a big body. So even by itself, you can just tap it, and it comes down with haste, essentially, the way the ability is worded. So you can just tap it to bounce something right away. Kind of nice. And then if you have a bunch of wizards, you just get rid of all your opponent's stuff, attack with your wizards, win the game. Pretty sweet card. We also got Kindred Boon and Kindred Dominance, which are a nice mirror image of each other. So Kindred Boon saves all your creatures of a chosen creature type. 4 mana enchantment, you choose a creature type when it enters the battlefield. For 1 and a white, you put a divinity counter on a creature of the chosen type, and those creatures are indestructible. So it gets around a lot of stuff. there are answers: Hour of Devastation, Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, anything that exiles, but Kindred Boon saves your creatures in combat and from a lot of removal. On the other hand, Kindred Dominance is the next one-sided Wrath, basically. If you're playing a tribal deck, you just choose the creature type that you're playing, and you destroy all of your opponent's creatures, unless they happen to have some of the same type. So I imagine you're playing vampires, let's say, or wizards. You choose wizards with it for 7 mana, you get to keep all your stuff, you blow up all your opponent's stuff, and assuming you do this in your first main phase, you get to attack right away and get into a bunch of damage after wrathing your opponent's board. Lastly, we got one sweet reprint to talk about, mostly because the art is awesome. Apprentice Necromancer, a cool way to get creatures back from your graveyard. So this is a reprint, but oh, the art, it's so much sweeter than the original. So if you have an Apprentice Necromancer deck, I would definitely consider putting this one in. I think it looks super sweet compared to the original version. And that brings us to the end of our Commander 2017 spoilers from today. So what do you think of Panharmonicon from the Command Zone Wizards? Vindictive Licid, what are you going to do with that? How good is Keru Mindeater? What deck do you want to play that in? Is Patron of the Vein going to show up over the other kill your stuff when I enter the battlefield creatures? How about Galecaster Colossus? Does that make you want to build a wizard deck? Anyway, let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.